There will be days when you don't feel like doing anything. No spark, no drive, no excitement. And in those days, most men quit. But the ones who win, they act anyway. They've learned to act without motivation. And that's the difference. Napoleon Hill never preached dependence on emotional highs. He warned against it. In his most powerful writings, he showed that success belongs not to the most inspired, but to the most disciplined. The men who move regardless of mood. The women who build regardless of how they feel. In this video, we go deep into what it really means to act without motivation and still win. You'll learn how Hill's timeless laws of success eliminate the need for emotional fuel and install a higher operating system, one based on definiteness, autosuggestion, discipline, and will. If you've ever felt like motivation comes and goes, if you've waited to feel ready before acting, if you've lost momentum just because the emotion disappeared, this is for you, because the truth is this. The winners you admire don't feel motivated all the time. They've just trained their minds to act anyway. And that training, it's a system. One Napoleon Hill designed step by step. So if you're done relying on mood and ready to move with power, let's begin. There's a lie that has infected the minds of millions. The lie that you must feel good to act. That motivation is the spark for movement, that without inspiration, execution is impossible. This idea is not just false, it's dangerous. It has created generations of drifters, all waiting to feel ready while life passes them by. Napoleon Hill exposed this lie over a century ago. He never taught motivation. He taught decision. He taught definiteness of purpose. He taught the supremacy of the controlled mind. Motivation to Hill was weak because it's reactive. But decision is pure power. It's proactive. It doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what must be done. The man who learns to act without motivation becomes unstoppable. He has installed a system in his psyche, a structure that overrides feeling. He doesn't rise because he's excited. He rises because he said he would, and that's the beginning of real power. Let's dismantle this. Motivation is emotion-based, and emotions fluctuate. They're influenced by weather, sleep, external, praise, fear, uncertainty. If your behavior depends on motivation, then your results will always be inconsistent. Hill warned of this in Outwitting the Devil. He said the greatest enemy of progress is drifting, and drifting begins when a man lets his emotions guide his decisions. The man who wins, the man Hill describes, is the one who disciplines his inner world. He creates rituals. He enforces standards. He does not negotiate with mood. He acts, always, consistently, repetitively, until the world has no choice but to bow to his results. How do you become this man? Start with decision. Hill said, successful people make decisions quickly and change them slowly, if ever. This is not about being impulsive. It's about being definite. You decide what matters. You decide what must be done. And you structure your day around it without exception. Once decision is made, install autosuggestion. Speak your commands aloud, repeatedly. Not motivational quotes, but specific affirmations of identity and purpose. I act with discipline. I do not wait. I move regardless of mood. I execute in silence. I persist until it bends. You say it daily, morning, night, and then you act, not just once, but over and over. Discipline is the product of repeated action. It's not a trait, it's a habit. A mental groove carved into the brain by consistency. And yes, your old self will resist. It will whisper, let's rest, let's wait, let's scroll. That voice must be attacked with movement, not argument, movement. Hill was relentless on this. The subconscious mind responds to action, not excuses. This is where freedom is born. The man who waits for motivation is a slave. The man who acts without it is a king. He doesn't need perfect conditions. He creates conditions through will, through repetition, through structure. And here's the reward. When you no longer rely on emotion to act, you become dangerous. You are no longer moved by applause. You are no longer distracted by doubt. You are no longer slowed by resistance. You are consistent, focused, effective. This is what Hill meant when he described organized effort. You stop chasing feeling and you start organizing action. Your calendar becomes your temple, your word becomes your law, and your execution becomes inevitable. If this resonates, if you feel the pull to rise above your own excuses, do something now. Like this video, subscribe, not as a fan, but as a declaration that from this moment forward, you're done with waiting. You're done with depending on mood. You are now the kind of person who acts, always, relentlessly, without motivation. The body is obedient. It rises when commanded. It executes when ordered. The problem is never the body, it's the mind. The mind, when undisciplined, becomes a wild dog, sniffing distraction, chasing noise, abandoning command. And the tragedy, most men never train it. They decorate it, they feed it content, but they never dominate it. Napoleon Hill taught that. The disciplined mind is the root of all power, not intelligence, not talent, not luck, but a mind trained to obey intention, not emotion. When you learn to act without motivation, what you're really doing is breaking the mind's addiction to pleasure. You are rewiring your internal compass from what feels good to what must be done. And this is the shift that separates the weak from the strong, the drifter from the focused, the imitator from the builder. But how do you train the mind to obey? Hill's answer was brutal in its simplicity, through repetition of action and repetition of thought. Nothing less, no shortcut, no hack. You do the hard thing repeatedly until it's harder not to do it. The first step is clarity. You cannot discipline what you haven't defined. Hill taught definiteness of purpose as the starting point of all achievement. Without it, the mind wanders. With it, the mind sharpens. You must define exactly what you are building, not vaguely, not someday, with sharpness, with structure. Next, install rituals. These are not trends, these are tools. Wake times, work blocks, planning sessions, focus routines, physical training. You do not allow your mind to vote. It is not a democracy. It is now a military structure, and you are both commander and soldier. He'll emphasize that the subconscious mind accepts all repetition as truth. If you act with discipline daily, even when you don't feel like it, your subconscious registers this as identity. You're now the kind of person who executes. The weak self can scream, but the body obeys the new command. This is how you become unshakable. Let's get specific. You wake, not when you feel like it, but when you said you would. You begin the task not because you're ready, but because it's time. You finish what you start not for applause, but because unfinished is unacceptable. The disciplined mind is not loud. It is precise. It is quiet. It does not need motivation, because it's governed by internal structure, not emotional state. And that internal structure must be protected. You do not allow mental sabotage. You do not tolerate lazy thoughts. Hill taught accurate thinking, the ability to separate fact from fiction. The fact is, you have a task. The fiction is, you need motivation to complete it. That thought must be destroyed instantly. This is where autosuggestion becomes warfare. You repeat your identity. You speak with weight. Not weak affirmations, but iron declarations. I do not wait. I do not hesitate. I act with precision. I lead myself. Said daily, said aloud, said until the old self goes quiet. Hill revealed, that the subconscious cannot resist emotionalized repetition. So you bring emotion, not hype, conviction. You stand in front of the mirror and declare who you are. Then you move. And when the action matches the word, belief is born. Identity is installed. Discipline becomes natural, not easy. Natural, that's the secret. The disciplined man still feels resistance. He still hears the whispers, but he does not obey them, because he has trained himself to obey something greater, his own standard. That standard must now be set. What time do you rise? How do you begin your morning? What do you consume? What task do you complete first? What distractions do you eliminate? What thought patterns do you reinforce? These are not questions. They are requirements. Because once the mind is trained to serve discipline, comparison dies, distraction fades, delay becomes disgusting. You act, not because you feel like it, but because your standard demands it. This is the man Napoleon Hill built his system for, the man who no longer asks, "How do I feel?" but instead commands, "What must I do?" The man who no longer relies on external hype, but instead installs internal code. You can be that man, not someday, now, by deciding, by repeating, by acting, by reinforcing, by refusing to stop. The disciplined mind obeys. And when it obeys your higher self, you win, repeatedly, relentlessly, without motivation. There is no external force more powerful than a man who has learned to command himself. He moves without approval. He acts without applause. He obeys the voice he built within and nothing else. That is self-command, and Napoleon Hill knew without it all other traits collapse under pressure. Most men are talented, some are intelligent, a few are even motivated, but very few possess self-command. That inner voice that says go and is obeyed instantly. No delay, no resistance, no debate, just motion, just execution, just momentum. Why is this so rare? Because most people are waiting to feel ready, waiting for clarity, waiting for motivation. But the men who win, those who embody Hill's philosophy, act without waiting, because they understand one unbreakable truth. Motion creates clarity, discipline builds motivation, obedience to vision creates confidence. When Hill spoke of definiteness of purpose, he wasn't talking about goals. He was talking about an internal contract, a covenant between the man and his mission. And once that contract is signed, self-command becomes law. You don't betray it, you don't question it, you move. This is why acting without motivation is not just a strategy, it's a requirement for greatness. Because there will be seasons when your energy fades, when the outcome is uncertain, when the world goes silent. In those moments, only the man of command continues. You must become that man. Let's make it practical. Self-command begins with language. The words you speak to yourself are not just observations. They are orders. If your inner dialogue is filled with hesitation, you will hesitate. If it's filled with strength, you will execute. That's why Hill taught autosuggestion, not as a trick, but as a daily ritual of control. I am the master of my fate. I command myself to act. I do not wait. I move with power. Said once, useless. Said daily, backed by behavior, unstoppable. Then, here comes structure. You cannot command a life built on chaos. Hill emphasized organized effort as a law of success. Your days must have order. Your time must be owned. You plan the work, then you work the plan. And in that rhythm, the mind adapts. It stops negotiating. It starts obeying. Discipline becomes identity. Identity becomes action. Action becomes results. And still no motivation. Because the new self no longer needs it. The new self understands that action is not an option. It's who he is. He trains daily, not to feel good, but to dominate weakness. He writes daily, not to inspire, but to sharpen his clarity. He builds daily, not to be seen, but because creation is his default. Self-command also requires detachment from emotion, not emotional suppression, but sovereignty. You feel the fatigue, you feel the distraction, but they no longer govern you. Hill warned, you either control your mind or it controls you. There is no middle ground. That control is not born in comfort, it is forged in resistance. You earn it by acting when your old self screams for rest. You reinforce it by finishing what others delay. You lock it in by executing, especially when no one else would. This is the fire, the code, the system of kings. And the result? You become untouchable. Not because you don't feel weak, but because you act strong. Not because you don't hear doubt, but because you obey discipline. Not because you're always inspired, but because you are always in command. You become consistent, not erratic, not emotional, but reliable, precise, respected, and in a world of noise, that presence speaks louder than anything. You are no longer chasing potential, you are embodying power. No more waiting, no more comparing, no more drifting. You rise because you said you would. You move because your code requires it. You win because you refuse to stop. This is self-command. This is Napoleon Hill. This is your new identity. Most people live in emotional slavery. Their days rise and fall with feelings. They move when they're inspired. They stop when they're tired. They begin with excitement and collapse at the first sign of resistance. Their entire existence is dictated by mood, and they call it normal. But Napoleon Hill had no tolerance for this kind of life. He called it mental suicide. In Hill's world, emotion is not the enemy, but it is not the leader either. Emotion is fuel, not steering. The moment you let it drive, you crash. Why? Because emotion is reactive, it's inconsistent, it changes by the hour, and no man can build legacy on what is unstable. That's why you must kill the idea that you need to feel good to act. You must sever the connection between emotion and execution. This is what separates those who perform once in a while from those who dominate consistently. This is how you become impervious to chaos. Hill didn't suggest this lightly. He saw firsthand how the most intelligent, most creative, and most gifted men failed, not because of lack of talent, but because of emotional indulgence. They could not master self, he wrote. And without mastery of self, all other forms of mastery collapse. What does this look like in real life? It means you write when you don't feel like it. You train when you're not in the mood. You execute the boring plan without seeking a dopamine fix. You show up even when it's dark inside. You speak truth even when it shakes your voice. Because the code is simple. Emotion action. You feel one thing, you do another. Why? Because your mission is louder than your mood. And if you can do that once, you begin to kill the old self, the weak version that only moved when it was praised. That needed validation before effort. That collapsed under tension. But if you can do it daily, you begin to form something new. A mind immune to impulse. A nervous system trained for tension. A soul anchored in structure, not reaction. And soon, your identity shifts. You're no longer the kind of person who tries. You're the kind who executes. You're no longer emotional. You're intentional. Hill called this the development of the will. He didn't define willpower as pushing harder. He defined it as directed inner force. You choose a goal. You repeat it. You move toward it. You act in harmony with it. And every time emotion tries to derail you, you override it. Not with force, but with clarity. Because clarity silences chaos. When your aim is definite, feelings lose authority. Now here's the question you must answer honestly. Where in your life are you letting emotions make your decisions for you? Is it your routine, your diet, your business, your discipline? Where have you justified weakness with the phrase, "I just don't feel like it"? Where have you mistaken emotion for instruction? These questions are not accusations. They are your blueprint, because wherever emotion is in control, there is chaos. Wherever action is in control, there is movement. And wherever movement is repeated, there is transformation. So you don't wait to feel better. You don't try to fix your feelings. You just act. And the action corrects the emotion. The action restores your focus. The action builds the new you. And when people see the results, they ask, how did you stay so consistent? How did you stay so motivated? But they'll never understand the truth. You didn't stay motivated. You became disciplined. You didn't feel like it. You just did it anyway. You didn't chase emotion. You killed it and replaced it with command. That is the new law. That is Hill's law. That is how you go from chaos to control, and from control to total domination. There is no thought powerful enough to replace action, no affirmation strong enough to substitute for movement, no visualization vivid enough to override reality. In Napoleon Hill's system, there is only one medicine that cures doubt, hesitation, fear, fatigue, and indecision: action. Hill taught this with uncompromising clarity. You can read, think, study, and prepare, but unless you move, you die standing. Still, success, wealth, mastery, they are never thoughts alone. They are the byproduct of forward motion. Here's the brutal truth. You will never think your way into the life you want. You will only act your way into it. And until your behavior aligns with your intention, you're not in transformation. You're in fantasy. This is why learning to act without motivation is not optional. It is the central law of execution. Because most days, motivation will vanish. Inspiration will fade. Emotion will betray you. The only constant you can rely on is movement. You must rewire your system to default to action, not just when it feels good, not when it's exciting, not when the sun is out and the feedback is positive, but especially when it's boring, when it's uncertain, when it's uncomfortable. That is when action becomes your weapon. Why? Because movement corrects everything. When you move, your thoughts shift. Clarity returns, energy spikes, doubt shrinks, identity sharpens. Hill revealed that the subconscious mind responds far more to action than to theory. It watches what you do and builds your self-image accordingly. That's why small acts matter: making the bed, writing the page, closing the loop, finishing what you start. Each one tells your system, I am in control. And that repetition, day after day, builds internal power faster than any external motivator ever could. Let's go deeper. Why do most people avoid movement? Because movement eliminates the illusion of progress. As long as you're planning, you can pretend. As long as you're learning, you can lie to yourself. But when you act, reality hits. You either did it or you didn't. This is why action is so rare. It exposes you, and Hill knew that exposure is sacred. It is the only way to confront truth. When you act, you face your patterns, you face your habits, you face your real level of discipline. And when you persist through that resistance, when you move anyway, something changes. You begin to respect yourself, not because you're perfect, but because you showed up when it was hard. Hill described this as the habit of doing more than paid for. Why? Because motion, repeated beyond minimum requirement, builds momentum. And momentum becomes magnetism. You act more, you doubt less, you attract more. You fear less, you build more. You compare less. Because now you're not reacting to life, you are creating it. That's what movement is. It's not a step, it's a signal. To yourself, to your environment, to your future. It says, I'm no longer waiting. I'm no longer preparing. I'm no longer hoping. I am doing. And that signal is louder than any affirmation you could ever recite. This is why you must act now, not later. Now. While you're tired, while you're uncertain, While the old self is still trying to scream, you don't wait to silence the voice, you move to bury it, because once action becomes default, the weak self has no ground left to stand on. You become dangerous, unstoppable, focused. You no longer depend on hope. You've replaced it with movement. No more asking, how do I get motivated? You move. No more waiting to feel ready. You move. No more comparing paces, timelines, or success levels. You move, and the more you move, the more powerful you feel. Not because the results are instant, but because your identity is changing. You are no longer the person who thinks. You are the one who executes. That is Hill's vision of greatness, not intellectual, not emotional, but mechanical, deliberate, embodied. You move, you build, you repeat, and you win. Not because of chance, but because of compound movement. So, the next time your mind whispers, "Not today," answer it with your legs, your hands, your body. Move, because motion isn't just strategy, it's your new religion. Comparison is the silent killer of progress. It whispers that you're behind, that others are ahead, that your pace is too slow, your results too small. It poisons your mind with doubt, distracts your focus, and derails your discipline. But Napoleon Hill taught that success is not a race against others. It's a commitment to your own definite purpose. In Think and Grow Rich, Hill emphasizes the importance of a definite chief aim. This is not about competing with others. It's about defining your own path with clarity and conviction. When you have a clear purpose, the noise of comparison fades. You no longer measure your progress against others, but against your own standards. Hill also introduces the concept of applied faith. This is the unwavering belief in your ability to achieve your purpose, regardless of external circumstances. When you compare yourself to others, you undermine your faith. You begin to doubt your path, your abilities, and your potential. But with applied faith, you stay committed to your journey, trusting that your efforts will yield results in due time. Another principle Hill discusses is autosuggestion. This involves repeating affirmations that reinforce your purpose and belief in yourself. By consistently feeding your mind positive thoughts, you build resilience against the negative effects of comparison. You remind yourself of your goals, your strengths, and your progress. Hill warns against the dangers of drifting, a concept he explores in Outwitting the Devil. Drifting occurs when you lack purpose and direction, making you susceptible to external influences, including the trap of comparison. To avoid drifting, you must maintain a clear focus on your goals and resist the urge to measure yourself against others. To break free from comparison, Hill advises cultivating a positive mental attitude, PMA. This involves focusing on your strengths, celebrating your progress, and maintaining optimism about your future. A positive attitude shields you from the negative emotions that comparison can evoke, such as envy, resentment, and self-doubt. Hill also highlights the importance of self-discipline. This means staying committed to your goals, even when it's challenging. When you compare yourself to others, you risk losing focus and motivation. But with self-discipline, you remain steadfast in your efforts, regardless of external distractions. In conclusion, comparison is a destructive habit that hinders your progress and undermines your confidence. By embracing Napoleon Hill's principles, definite chief aim, applied faith, autosuggestion, positive mental attitude, and self-discipline, you can stay focused on your unique path and achieve success on your terms. There is a power more reliable than energy, more enduring than motivation, more unstoppable than emotion. Napoleon Hill named it faith, but not the passive kind, not belief for comfort, not vague spirituality. He meant a deliberate state of mental dominance, forged by repetition, emotion, and decision. In Hill's world, faith is not a feeling. It's a strategy, And when it's fused with definiteness of purpose, it becomes a force that makes action inevitable, regardless of mood. Why do most people fail to act without motivation? Because they trust their emotions more than their vision. They wait to feel before moving. But Hill taught the opposite. Faith is the eternal elixir which gives life, power, and action to the impulse of thought. Faith makes you act even when your feelings say wait. Faith is not built by wishing. It's built by autosuggestion, the daily, intentional feeding of your subconscious with commands of confidence, purpose, and identity. It's speaking aloud the man you are becoming, until your system accepts it as reality, and once it does, you move. Not because you feel like it, but because your identity has changed. This is the secret. Motivation is a spark. Faith is a furnace. Motivation lifts you once. Faith carries you for years. When Hill wrote about faith, he made it mechanical. You mix it with burning desire. You emotionalize it through repetition. You reinforce it through action. And the more you move, the deeper faith embeds itself. Eventually, emotion is irrelevant because your belief is stronger than your mood. Here's what that looks like. You speak your purpose out loud, even when your results are small. You take the action, especially when no one sees it. You stay in motion, not because it feels good, but because it's who you are now. That's the transformation. And Hill knew, once you've replaced emotion with faith, you are unshakable. You cannot rely on willpower forever. It fades, it weakens, it breaks. Especially when pressure builds, distractions rise, and motivation vanishes. Napoleon Hill understood this long before neuroscience confirmed it. His answer, don't depend on will, build rituals. A ritual is not a routine. It's not habit. It's a sacred system designed to override emotion and align your body, mind, and environment with your definite chief aim. Hill taught that success is not achieved by those who act occasionally, but by those who execute predictably, automatically, almost religiously. Why? Because the real enemy is not laziness. It's the old self. The self that scrolls when it should build. The self that sleeps when it should rise. The self that waits to feel ready before acting. That version of you doesn't need to be motivated. It needs to be killed, and it dies, not through thinking, planning, or promising. It dies through ritualized execution. When your days are built on non-negotiables, precise wake times, fixed execution blocks, auto-suggestion rituals, mental training windows, you begin to erode the old identity, and the new one rises. Ritual is the environment where identity is shaped. You are not just what you believe, you are what you repeat. This is what Hill meant when he spoke of organized effort. Every ritual is a soldier in your private army. It doesn't wait, it doesn't skip, it doesn't adjust to mood. It just moves, daily, silently, powerfully. Eventually, others ask, how are you so consistent? But you don't feel consistent because it's no longer effort, it's just who you are. Rituals are how you stop needing motivation. They're how you build momentum. They're how you destroy the man you were and install the man you were meant to become. This is the line, the one that separates watchers from builders, spectators from executors, the motivated from the forged. You've been told for years that feeling good matters. That energy is required. That you need to be in the right headspace to move. But here, right now, we kill that idea permanently. You do not need to feel ready. You do not need to feel anything. You just need to act. Napoleon Hill never built his system around emotion. He built it around law, mental laws, universal laws, success laws, laws that do not bend to feelings. Laws that reward structure, clarity, persistence, faith, and relentless action. And now you know them. So the question is not whether you're motivated. The question is, will you obey the code Or will you drift back into the same soft version of yourself that never finishes what it starts? This is not about pushing harder. This is about deciding you've been given the blueprint. Kill motivation dependence. Install self-command through repetition. Replace emotion with vision. Make action your identity. Stack rituals until execution becomes natural. Act while tired, unsure, unseen, and uncelebrated. Dominate your day or be dominated by doubt. There is no neutral. Every time you delay, you reinforce weakness. Every time you act without waiting, you reinforce power, and power compounds. That's how it works. Small decisions, repeated daily. They either kill your future or build it. Hill made it brutally clear in Outwitting the Devil. If you don't take control of your mind, something else will. That something might look like laziness, comparison, comfort, fatigue, fear. But it's all the same force. Drift, and drift only has one enemy: deliberate daily action. So now, right now, before you feel ready, before the inspiration fades, you must decide. Are you the man who moves without feeling? Are you the woman who executes without needing a reason? Are you done needing hype, applause, and momentum? Because everything changes once you act as if you already are the version you want to become. That's how faith works. You act it before you feel it. You walk it before it shows up. You move, and movement builds belief. This video wasn't designed to make you feel better. It was built to install a standard, to give you the tools to act without motivation and still win for the rest of your life. So here's what you do next. Click the like button, not for ego, but as a signal to your future self that you're done living on pause. Subscribe, because this isn't a one-time shift. This is a system of thinking, moving, building, and dominating. And share this video with 3 people, not just anyone. Send this to 3 builders, 3 people who you know are ready to stop drifting, stop comparing, stop waiting, and start executing. And now, the question only you can answer. Will you take command of your actions today? Or will you keep living at the mercy of your feelings?